The battleship sat at harbor, used more extensively for training than she had been in battle. In her career thus far, only 4 shells had been fired at the enemy. As she sat hosting aviators for training, the worst possible scenario would ensue. Without warning, her turret exploded, sending a massive fireball into the sky. Almost instantly, her bow sank like a stone, and well over 1,000 would lose their lives. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Mutsu, named after the Mutsu province, was the second and last Nagato-class dreadnought battleship built for the IJN at the end of World War I. She was laid down on June 1, 1918 and launched on May 31, 1920, being commissioned the following year after her sea trials on October 24, 1921. Interestingly enough, funding for the ship had partly come from donations from school children. Mutsu almost didn't come to be, as the Americans were upset that they were losing the naval arms race that was developing between the UK, US, and Japan. The Washington Naval Treaty proposed to have capital ships scrapped, even those under construction, and Mutsu was specifically listed. The Japanese refused, and in exchange, they scrapped the now obsolete dreadnought Setsu, and there was a similar arrangement for several American Colorado-class dreadnoughts that were fitting out. Before we get too far into her story, let's look at her specs. Mutsu was a Nagato-class battleship that displaced 32,200 long tons standard and 38,498 long tons fully loaded. She was 708 feet long, had a beam of 95 feet wide, and a draft of 29 feet 6 inches deep. Her crew consisted of 1,333 officers and enlisted as built, and 1,475 as of 1942. In 1927, her bow was remodeled to reduce the amount of sea spray produced when steaming into a head sea. This increased her overall length by 5 feet 3 inches to 713 feet 3 inches long, and during her 1934 to 1935 reconstruction, her stern was lengthened to aid with speed, adding an extra 24 feet 9 inches to improve her speed, and her forward superstructure was rebuilt into a pagoda mast. She was also given torpedo bulges to improve underwater protection, as was standard at the time. All of these changes brought her length to 738 feet long, and her displacement increased to 45,950 long tons at deep load. When we look at her propulsion, Mutsu had 4 Gihon geared steam turbines, each of which drove one propeller shaft. The turbines were designed to produce a total of 80,000 shaft horsepower, utilizing steam from 21 Kampon water tube boilers. 15 of these boilers were oil-fired, and the remaining 6 were coal-fired. She had a range of 5,500 nautical miles at a speed of 16 knots, and she reached 26.7 knots during her sea trials. During the 1924 refit, her forefunnel was rebuilt in a serpentine shape to try and prevent smoke interference with the bridge and fire control systems, but this didn't work. That funnel would be eliminated during the 1934 to 1935 reconstruction when all of her boilers were replaced by 10 lighter and more powerful oil-fired Kampon boilers. In addition, her turbines were replaced with lighter, more modern units. After reconstruction, Mutsu reached a speed of 24.98 knots. The ship was fitted with a 32-foot 10-inch rangefinder in the forward superstructure. Additionally, she had 19-foot 8-inch and 9-foot 10-inch anti-aircraft rangefinders that were also fitted, although we don't know when. The 2 short-range rangefinders were replaced by 32-foot 10-inch units in 1932 to 1933. Mutsu was initially fitted with a Type 13 fire control system derived from Vickers equipment received during World War I, but this would be replaced by a Type 14 system circa 1925. No director for anti-aircraft fire would be included until the Type 31 fire control director was introduced in 1932. Mutsu would receive a new anti-aircraft director called the Type 94 at an unknown date, as well as a Type 95 director also introduced at an unknown date. Now, let's get into the armament, armor, and aircraft. Starting with armament, Mutsu had 4 twin-mounted 41cm guns, 118 single-mounted 14cm guns, 4 twin-mounted 12.7cm dual-purpose guns, and 10 twin-mounted 25mm anti-aircraft guns. As for armor, she had deck armor that ranged between 1.5 inches to 3.9 inches thick, depending upon location. Gun turret armor that ranged from 7.5 to 20 inches thick depending upon the turret, and barbette armor that was 18 inches thick. And yes, you heard me correctly earlier when I mentioned aircraft. In 1926, Mutsu had an additional boom added to the main mast to handle the Yokosuka E-1Y float plane, recently assigned to the ship for reconnaissance. In 1933, a catapult was fitted between the main mast and turret number 3, and a collapsible crane was installed in a portside sponson the following year to retrieve it. The ship was able to operate 2 or 3 seaplanes, though no hangar was aboard. In 1938, she began operating Nakajima E-8N2 biplanes, and a more powerful catapult was installed in November of that year to handle the heavier aircraft like the single Kawanishi E-7K, added in 1939 to 1940. On February 11, 1943, Mitsubishi F-1M biplanes replaced the E-8Ns. To say that she was armed to the teeth would be an understatement. But unfortunately, it would do little for her. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Okay, let's get into her career. After her commissioning on October 24, 1921, she'd undergo a few captains before she was assigned to the 1st Battleship Division on December 1st of that year. Mutsu hosted Edward, Prince of Wales, and his aide-de-camp and second cousin, Lieutenant Louis Mountbatten, on April 12, 1922, during the prince's visit to Japan. Following the Great Kanto earthquake on September 1, 1923, Mutsu loaded supplies at Uchinora Bay, Kyushu on September 4th for the victims of said earthquake. Alongside her sister Nagato, she'd later sink the hulk of the obsolete battleship Satsuma on September 7, 1924, during gunnery practice in Tokyo Bay, in accordance with the Washington Naval Treaty. At this time, the Japanese were still trying to play nice with this treaty, though further restrictions would push them beyond their limits soon enough. The ship was transferred to reserve on December 1, 1925. Mutsu served as flagship of Emperor Hirohito during the 1927 naval maneuvers and fleet review. On March 29, 1929, Mutsu and 3 light cruisers were assigned to Battleship Division 3. Mutsu's anti-aircraft armament would be upgraded in 1932, and after this, she was assigned to Battleship Division 1 of the 1st Fleet, again serving as the Emperor's flagship during the annual maneuvers and fleet review in 1933. The ship was placed in reserve on November 15th and began her lengthy reconstruction, which was completed on September 30th, 1936. Mutsu rejoined the 1st Battleship Division on December 1, 1936, and in August of 1937, she transported 2,000 men of the 11th Infantry Division to Shanghai during the Second Sino-Japanese War, which began with Japan's invasion of Manchuria and can be considered the true beginning of World War II. Her seaplanes bombed targets in Shanghai on August 24th before she returned to Sasebo the following day. Mutsu was then placed in reserve from December 15, 1938 to November 15, 1939. She was refitted in early 1941 in preparation for war, and as part of this work, she was fitted with external degaussing coils and additional armor for her barbettes. As we already know, World War II in Europe began on September 1, 1939 with Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland, and it would begin in the Pacific on December 7, 1941 when Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Hawaii. During World War II, Mutsu would actually see very limited action, spending most of her time in home waters. On December 8, 1941, Mutsu sortied for the Bonin Islands alongside Nagato, as well as Hyuga, Yamashiro, Fuso, and Issei of the Battleship Division 2, and the light carrier Hosho as distant support for the fleet attacking Pearl Harbor, and she returned 6 days later. On January 18, 1942, Mutsu towed the obsolete armored cruiser Nishin as a target for the new battleship Yamato, which promptly sank Nishin. In June of 1942, Mutsu was assigned to the main body of the 1st Fleet during the Battle of Midway, alongside Yamato, Nagato, Hosho, the light cruiser Sendai, 9 destroyers, and 4 auxiliary ships. Following the loss of all 4 carriers on June 4th, Yamamoto attempted to lure the American forces west to within range of the Japanese air groups at Wake Island, and into a night engagement with his surface forces, but the Americans withdrew and Mutsu saw no action. After rendezvousing with the remains of the striking force on June 6th, about half of the survivors from the sunken aircraft carriers of the 1st Air Fleet were transferred to Mutsu. She'd arrive in Hashirejima on June 14th. On July 14th, Mutsu was transferred to Battleship Division 2 and then to the advanced force of the 2nd Fleet later on August 9th. 2 days later, the ship departed Yokosuka accompanied by the cruisers Atago, Takao, Maya, Haguro, Yura, and Miyoko, as well as the seaplane tender Chitose, and escorting destroyers to support operations during the Guadalcanal campaign. They arrived at Truk Lagoon on August 17th, and on the 20th, while sailing from Truk to rendezvous with the main body of the 3rd Fleet, Mutsu, the heavy cruiser Atago, and escorting destroyers unsuccessfully attempted to locate the escort carrier USS Long Island in response to a flying boat detecting the American ship. During the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 27th, Mutsu, while assigned to the support force, fired 4 shells at enemy reconnaissance aircraft, the first and only time her guns were fired at enemies during the war. Mutsu returned to Truk on September 2nd, and here, a group of skilled AA gunnery officers and men were detached to serve as instructors to ground-based naval anti-aircraft gunners stationed in Rabaul. During October, Mutsu offloaded surplus fuel oil to the fleet oil tanker Kenyo Maru, allowing the tanker to refuel other ships involved in Guadalcanal operations. On January 7, 1943, Mutsu departed from Truk for Japan via Saipan, accompanied by the carrier Zuikaku, the heavy cruiser Suzuya, and 4 destroyers. Mutsu left Hashirejima for Kire on April 13th, where she prepared to sortie to reinforce the Japanese garrisons in the Aleutian Islands in response to the Battle of the Komandorsky Islands. The operation was cancelled the next day, and the ship resumed training. She was destined for so much more, but she'd accomplished so little thus far. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, let's get into the end of Mutsu. On June 8, 1943, Mutsu was moored in the Hashirejima Fleet anchorage, with 113 flying cadets and 40 instructors from the Tsuchiura Naval Air Group aboard for familiarization. At 12:13 p.m., the magazine of her No. 3 turret suddenly exploded. This obliterated the adjacent structure of the ship and cut her in half, letting in thousands of tons of water. A massive influx of water into the machinery spaces caused the 490-foot forward section of the ship to capsize to starboard and sink almost immediately. The 148-foot stern section upended and remained floating until about 2 a.m. on June 9th, before finally sinking, coming to a rest a few hundred feet south of the main wreck at 33 degrees 58 minutes north, 132 degrees 24 minutes east. The nearby Fuso immediately launched 2 lifeboats which, together with the destroyers Tamanami and Wakatsuki and the cruisers Tatsuta and Mogami, rescued just 353 survivors from the 1,474 crew members and visitors aboard Mutsu. 1,121 men were killed in the explosion and subsequent sinking, with only 13 of the visiting aviators surviving. After the explosion, as the rescue operations started, the fleet was alerted and the area searched for Allied submarines, but no traces of the Allies were found. To avert the potential damage to morale from the loss of a battleship so soon after a string of recent setbacks in the war effort, Mutsu's destruction was declared a state secret. Mass cremations of recovered bodies began almost immediately after the sinking. Captain Teruhiko Miyoshi's body was recovered by divers on June 17th, but his wife wouldn't know until January 6th of 1944, more than 6 months later. Both he and his second-in-command, Captain Koro Uno, were posthumously promoted to Rear Admiral, as was normal practice. To further prevent rumors from spreading, healthy and recovered survivors were reassigned to various garrisons in the Pacific Ocean. Some of the survivors were sent to Truk in the Caroline Islands and assigned to the 41st Guard Force. Another 150 were sent to Saipan in the Mariana Islands, where most were killed in 1944 during the Battle of Saipan. Like we mentioned in this past Friday's episode, at the time of the explosion, Mutsu's magazine contained some 16-inch Type 3 Sanshikidan incendiary shrapnel anti-aircraft shells, which had caused a fire at the Sagami Arsenal several years prior due to improper storage. Because they were suspected to be responsible for the explosion, the Minister of the Navy, Admiral Shimada Shigetaro, immediately ordered the removal of Type 3 shells from all IJN ships carrying them until the conclusion of the investigation into the loss of Mutsu. Speaking of the investigation, let's look at that. A commission led by Admiral Koichi Shiozawa was convened 3 days after the sinking to investigate the loss. The commission considered several possible causes, including sabotage by enemy secret agents. Given the heavy security at the anchorage and lack of claims of responsibility by the Allies, this could be discounted. Sabotaged by disgruntled crewmen. While no individual was named in the Commission's final report, its conclusion was that the cause of the explosion was most likely a crewman in the No. 3 turret who had been recently accused of theft and was believed to have been suicidal. A midget or fleet submarine attack. Extensive searches immediately following the sinking had failed to detect any enemy submarine, and the Allies had made no attempt at claiming the enormous propaganda value of sinking a capital ship in her home anchorage. Consequently, this possibility was quickly discounted. Eyewitnesses also spoke of a reddish-brown fireball, which indicated a magazine explosion. This was confirmed during the exploration of the wreck by divers. And finally, accidental explosion within a magazine. While Mutsu carried many projectiles, immediate suspicion focused on the Type 3 anti-aircraft shell, as it was believed to have caused a fire before the war at Sagami Naval Arsenal. Tests were conducted at Kamigakubi Naval Proving Ground on several shells salvaged from the No. 3 turret, and the experiments were unable to induce the shells to explode under normal conditions. The Commission issued its preliminary conclusions on June 25th, well before the divers had completed their investigation of the wreck, and concluded that the explosion was a result of a disgruntled crewman. Historian Mike Williams put forward an alternative theory of the fire, and I quote, "A number of observers noted smoke coming from the vicinity of No. 3 turret and the aircraft area just forward of it, just before the explosion. Compared with other nations' warships in wartime service, Japanese battleships contained a large amount of flammable materials, including wooden decking, furniture, and insulation, as well as cotton and wool bedding. Although she had been modernized in the 1930s, some of the Mutsu's original electrical wiring may have remained in use. While fire in the secure magazines was a very remote possibility, a fire in an area adjacent to the No. 3 magazine could have raised the temperature to a level sufficient to ignite the highly sensitive black powder primers stored in the magazine and thus cause the explosion." After the sinking, divers were brought to the wreck site to retrieve bodies and to assess the damage to the ship. Prior to diving on the wreck, they were allowed to familiarize themselves with her layout on board Nagato, Mutsu's sister ship. The Navy leadership initially seriously considered raising the wreck and rebuilding her, although these plans were dropped after the divers completed their survey of the ship on July 22, 1943. Thus, she was struck from the Navy list on September 1st of that year. As part of the investigation, dive boat number 3746, a small Nishimura-class search and rescue submarine, explored the wreck on June 17th with a crew of 7 officers. While crawling on the harbor bottom, it became snagged on the wreckage and the crew nearly suffocated before they could free themselves and surface. In July of 1944, the oil-starved IJN recovered 570 long tons of fuel oil from the wreck. After the war, salvage operations would begin. Her 3-foot 1-inch diameter chrysanthemum mon, symbol of the imperial throne, was raised in 1953 but was lost or scrapped shortly after. One of the 140mm casemate guns was raised in 1963 and donated to the Yasukuni Shrine. In 1970, the Fukuda Salvage Company began salvage operations that lasted until 1978 and scrapped roughly 75% of the ship. The 2 aft turrets were raised in 1970 and 71. Despite the fact that the salvaged components were remarkably preserved, in particular the 2 gun turrets, bow and stern, the ship was broken up for her low background steel and sold to an anonymous research institute. The salvagers retrieved 849 bodies of crewmen lost during the explosion that had not been recovered at the time. In 1995, the Mutsu Memorial Museum declared that no further salvage operations were planned. The only significant thing that remains under the water is a 114-foot 10-inch long section running from the bridge structure forward to the vicinity of the No. 1 turret. The highest portion of the ship is 39 feet 4 inches below the surface. We do have many artifacts left from her, luckily, so despite the fact this great battleship no longer exists, we can still learn from her and witness her. Mutsu was a battleship destined for things much greater, but unfortunately, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. Her sister ship Nagato would go on to be one of the last surviving IJN ships after the war, being lost during weapons testing at Operation Crossroads.